I still remember the day I first met Laura. It was at a friend's party, one of those fancy gatherings where everyone tries to outdo each other with their clothes, their conversations, and even their laughter. I wasn't particularly interested in being there. I've never been one for showiness, but Laura caught my eye. She was elegant, confident, and, I'll admit, absolutely stunning. There was something about her that drew me in, something I couldn't quite place at the time. It wasn't long before we were talking, and for the first time that evening, I felt like I belonged. Laura was magnetic, charming everyone in the room, yet somehow, she made me feel like I was the only one there. We hit it off immediately. She laughed at my dry humor, and I admired her ambition and the way she carried herself. By the end of the night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. It wasn't until we started dating that I noticed how much she valued appearances. Laura loved the finer things: designer bags, luxury cars, expensive vacations. She dropped comments about how she admired ambitious men who knew how to provide. At the time, I thought it was endearing. It made me want to work harder to impress her, even though I'd already built a successful career. You see, I've always believed in keeping my success quiet. I'm the kind of person who drives a simple car and wears a plain watch, even though I could easily afford something flashier. My father used to say, "The loudest man in the room is usually the one with the least to offer." That stuck with me. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone, and I figured Laura would appreciate me for who I was, not for what I owned. When we got married, I thought we were building a life based on mutual respect and understanding. I thought she saw the man behind the modest lifestyle, the one who worked hard not to impress others but to secure a future. I didn't think she'd need to know the full details of my income or my investments. After all, isn't marriage about more than money? But as the years went on, I started to notice little cracks in our foundation. Laura would make jokes, seemingly harmless at first, about how I was too humble for my own good. She'd tease me in front of her friends, saying things like, "Daniel could use a lesson in spending." I'd laugh along, thinking it was all in good fun. Looking back, I should have realized those comments weren't jokes. They were warnings. Laura grew restless with my frugality. While I was content saving for the future, she wanted to live in the now. "What's the point of earning money if you're not going to enjoy it?" she'd say. I didn't argue. I never liked confrontation, but I couldn't help but feel like we were speaking two different languages. To me, financial stability was freedom. To her, it was a ticket to a life of indulgence. I thought things would improve with time. I believed that our love could bridge the gap between our values. I even started compromising, taking her on more trips, buying her gifts that made her eyes light up. But no matter how much I tried, it was never enough. I began to feel like I was walking a tightrope, trying to balance her expectations with my principles. The worst part? I didn't see it coming. I didn't see how those small jokes, those passing comments, and those moments of dissatisfaction would eventually snowball into something I couldn't control. I didn't realize that Laura's love for luxury wasn't just a preference, it was her priority. And I, the man she married, was becoming less of a partner and more of a placeholder. In hindsight, maybe I was naive. Maybe I should have recognized the signs sooner. But at the time, I was too focused on making things work. I believed in our marriage, in our potential to grow together. I didn't realize I was the only one holding on. If someone had told me back then how everything would unfold, I might have laughed it off. But life has a funny way of teaching you lessons you didn't think you needed. My story isn't just about Laura. It's about what happens when you trust someone to see your worth beyond the surface, only to find out they were looking for something else entirely. I should have seen it sooner. The signs were everywhere. Laura had always been vocal about her love for the finer things, but at first, I thought it was just her way of appreciating life. Who doesn't like a bit of luxury now and then? But with time, it became clear that it wasn't just about enjoying nice things. It was about needing them, craving them, and, most importantly, being seen with them. It started small. She'd casually point out designer handbags when we walked through the mall. "Isn't this gorgeous?" she'd say, her voice laced with that unmistakable tone of expectation. I'd nod and smile, offering some noncommittal response like, "It's nice." And then she'd laugh, "Oh, Daniel, you have no taste." I always took it as playful teasing, but there was something about the way her laughter lingered, as though it wasn't entirely a joke. Soon, those little remarks became more frequent. "We need to upgrade our car," she'd say out of the blue one evening. I looked up from my book, confused. "The car's fine," I replied. It wasn't just fine. It was practically new, and more importantly, it was reliable. "Fine isn't good enough," she shot back. "Don't you think we deserve better?" There it was. Deserve. That word lingered in the air like a challenge. It wasn't about the car. It was about the image, the statement it made. Laura wanted the world to know she was married to someone who could provide her with everything she desired. And as far as she was concerned, I wasn't stepping up to the plate. I started noticing how she'd compare our life to others. "Did you see Sarah and Tom's vacation photos? Bora Bora looks amazing," she'd say while scrolling through her phone. "Maybe we should plan a trip like that." I'd glance at her, trying to gauge if she was serious. "I thought you said you wanted to save for a house," I reminded her. She shrugged, not even looking up. "We can do both. Life's too short to wait." I tried to compromise. I really did. I booked us a trip to a luxury resort, not quite Bora Bora, but close enough. I thought it would make her happy, that maybe she'd see I was willing to meet her halfway. And for a while, it seemed like it worked. She was thrilled, posting photos and gushing about the experience to her friends. But when we got back, it was as though the trip had never happened. She was back to pointing out all the things we didn't have, all the ways I wasn't measuring up. And then came the jokes. Always in public. Always with that light-hearted tone that made it hard to tell if she was serious. "Daniel's so frugal. He probably has a secret stash of coupons somewhere," she'd say at dinners with friends, her laughter echoing louder than everyone else's. I laughed too, pretending it didn't bother me, but inside, it stung. I wanted to tell her the truth, that I wasn't frugal out of necessity but out of choice. That the reason I didn't flaunt my wealth was because I'd seen how easily money could change people, how it could attract the wrong kind of attention. But every time I thought about explaining myself, I stopped. Would it even matter? Would it change anything? The distance between us grew with every joke, every pointed comment, every comparison to people who had more, or at least appeared to. I started to feel like I was failing her, like I wasn't enough. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what I did, it would never be enough. The breaking point came one evening when Laura invited her friends over for dinner. I cooked, something I love to do, and served a simple yet elegant meal. As her friends complimented the food, Laura smiled and said, "Daniel's great at these small things, but I keep telling him, we need a chef." I don't know what hurt more, the way her friends laughed or the fact that she genuinely believed that. It wasn't just about wanting a chef, it was about what the chef represented. To Laura, it was another status symbol, another way to prove to the world that she'd made it. Looking back, I realized that was when the cracks in our marriage began to feel more like chasms. It wasn't just our values that were different, it was our entire outlook on life. I saw success as something quiet, personal, and fulfilling. Laura saw it as something loud, visible, and enviable. I told myself things would get better, that it was just a phase, that Laura would eventually see the value in what we had. But deep down, I think I always knew the truth. We weren't building a life together. We were living two completely different lives under the same roof. I'll never forget the dinner that changed everything. It was one of those gatherings Laura insisted on hosting, the kind where she invited her friends who loved to gossip and show off. I didn't mind hosting. I liked the cooking part, but I always dreaded the conversations. They usually revolved around who was buying what, who was traveling where, and whose husband was the most successful. I wasn't blind to the subtext. That night, I stood in the kitchen finishing up the pasta while Laura played the perfect hostess, laughing and mingling with her friends in the living room. From the sound of it, they were in full swing, comparing their lives as if it were a competition. I walked in with the serving tray, smiling politely as I placed the dishes on the table. "Here comes Chef Daniel," one of her friends teased, and everyone laughed. I chuckled along, though I felt like I was being sized up. Laura leaned into the joke. "Oh, Daniel loves cooking. He says it's his way of saving money." The room erupted in laughter, and Laura gave me a playful nudge, her smile wide. It wasn't the first time she'd made a comment like that, but something about the way she said it this time felt different. There was no hint of affection, no lightness. It was as though she wanted to make sure everyone knew exactly how frugal I was. Trying to shrug it off, I took my seat, but the conversation didn't stop there. One of her friends leaned in, looking at Laura. "So, when are you upgrading your car? I saw this gorgeous new model the other day. It's perfect for you." Laura sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "Oh, trust me, I'd love to, but you know Daniel. He thinks the car we have is just fine." This time, I couldn't hide the flash of irritation. "The car we have is fine," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It's reliable, it's paid off, and it gets us where we need to go. But it's not exactly a statement, is it?" her friend quipped, sipping her wine. "A car is like an accessory. It tells people who you are." Laura laughed. "Exactly. But Daniel's more about practicality. He doesn't care about making statements." I could feel my patience wearing thin. "Maybe because I think actions speak louder than appearances," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. The room went quiet for a moment, and Laura's smile faltered. "Relax, Daniel," she said, waving it off. "We're just having fun." But it didn't feel like fun. It felt like I was being reduced to a caricature, a man too simple to understand the finer things in life. And for the first time, I wondered if Laura actually respected me at all. As the evening wore on, I stayed quiet, letting Laura and her friends carry the conversation. But when the last guest left, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Why do you do that?" I asked, standing in the kitchen as she loaded glasses into the dishwasher. "Do what?" she replied, not even looking at me. "Make me the punchline. Every time we're around your friends, it's the same thing. Daniel's frugal. Daniel doesn't get it. Do you even hear yourself?" She stopped what she was doing and turned to face me, her expression annoyed. "Oh, come on, Daniel. It's just a joke. Why are you taking it so seriously?" "Because it's not just a joke," I said, my voice rising. "It's every time. It's like you need to prove to them that you're better than this life we've built. Like you're embarrassed by me." Her eyes narrowed. "Embarrassed? Don't be ridiculous. I'm just being honest. You could loosen up a little, you know? Enjoy life more." "Enjoy life more?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think I don't enjoy life? Just because I'm not throwing money around like it's meaningless?" She crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "Maybe I just want to feel like we're moving forward. Like we're not stuck in the same boring routine." I stared at her, my frustration boiling over. "Do you even see what we have? A home, stability, no debt, and you're still not happy. What more do you want, Laura?" Her silence spoke volumes. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The look on her face said it all. This wasn't enough for her. That night, I slept on the couch. Not because she asked me to, but because I needed the space to think. For the first time, I let myself wonder if our marriage was built on the wrong foundation. I thought back to the early days, to the way she lit up when I told her about my dreams. Was it me she loved, or the idea of what I could provide? The argument stayed with me for days, a constant weight on my chest. I tried to push it aside, to focus on work, to convince myself that things would get better. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something had shifted, and there was no going back. The argument I had with Laura during that dinner stuck with me like an unshakable shadow. I thought things couldn't get worse. I was wrong. One morning, a few weeks later, I walked into the living room and found Laura sitting on the couch, dressed immaculately. She had that look on her face, the one she wore when she had something planned but hadn't told me yet. Her manicured fingers tapped a stack of papers resting on the coffee table. "What's this?" I asked, setting my coffee cup down and gesturing to the papers. She looked up at me with a calm, almost detached expression. "Divorce papers." For a moment, I thought I misheard her. Divorce? The word hung in the air, surreal and heavy. "What are you talking about?" "I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady and clinical, like she was discussing the weather. "This isn't working for me anymore. I've filed for divorce." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "What do you mean this isn't working? You didn't even talk to me about this. How can you just decide?" "Daniel," she interrupted, her tone sharp, "we both know this marriage isn't what it should be. You're stuck in your ways, and I can't keep living like this. I want more. More. I repeated, anger bubbling beneath my confusion. What does that even mean, Laura? We have everything we need. No, Daniel, she said, her voice rising slightly. We have what you need. What I need is different. I need a partner who understands what it means to actually enjoy life, to live it fully. I can't do this anymore. You're too content with mediocrity. Mediocrity? I echoed, stunned. Is that what you think this is? Our life? Mediocre? She sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. I'm sorry, Daniel. I just don't want to feel trapped anymore. I stood there, my mind racing. The woman I'd built my life with, the woman I thought I knew, was sitting in front of me telling me that everything we had wasn't enough for her. That I wasn't enough. And then she dropped the second bombshell. I've met someone else, she said, her voice quieter now, as if that would soften the blow. It's serious. He understands me in ways you don't. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. You've met someone else? My voice was low, but the weight of my words carried all the hurt I felt. So this was never about us, was it? You already had one foot out the door. Daniel, please, she said, holding up a hand as if to stop me from spiraling. I didn't plan this. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. And you thought the best way to handle it was to blindside me with divorce papers? She didn't respond. Instead, she slid the papers across the table toward me. Just sign them, Daniel. Let's make this as simple as possible. I picked up the papers, my hands trembling with anger and disbelief. That's when I noticed the clause. She wasn't just asking for a divorce. She wanted me to forfeit any claim to shared property. You want me to give up everything? I asked, my voice rising. Is that what this is about, Laura? You're leaving me for someone else, and now you want to strip me of what I've built. It's fair, she said coldly. You've always been so frugal anyway. It's not like you need much. That was it. The final insult. The audacity of her words burned through me, but instead of lashing out, I did something I hadn't done in years. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I realized something in that moment. Laura didn't know me at all. She thought she was walking away from a man with nothing to offer, but the truth was, she had no idea what she was leaving behind. I'll think about it, I said, placing the papers back on the table and walking out of the room. I needed time to process what had just happened, but one thing was certain, this wasn't over. Over the next few weeks, the divorce was finalized. Laura moved out and remarried her new partner almost immediately. I didn't fight her on the terms. Why would I? Let her take what she thought mattered. She had no clue what I was worth, financially or otherwise. As I watched her move on with her life, flaunting her new relationship on social media, I felt an odd sense of peace. She thought she'd traded up. She thought she'd won. But the truth was, Laura had no idea what she just lost. It was just a few days after the divorce was finalized and Laura had officially remarried. I was adjusting to the quiet of my new routine when my phone rang. The name flashing on the screen stopped me in my tracks. Laura. For a moment, I debated whether to answer. What could she possibly want? But curiosity won over, and I picked up. Hello? I said, my tone neutral. There was silence for a beat before her voice came through, shaky and hesitant. Daniel, hi. I need to talk to you. I leaned back in my chair, surprised by her tone. Laura was always so composed, so sure of herself. This didn't sound like the confident woman who'd pushed those divorce papers in front of me. What's going on, Laura? I asked, keeping my voice steady. There was a pause, then a deep sigh. I don't know how to say this, but things aren't going as planned. I frowned, not quite following. What do you mean? It's him. My new husband, she said, her voice trembling. He left. He packed up and disappeared without a word. I sat up straighter, my surprise quickly turning to disbelief. He left? Just like that? Yes, she said, the panic in her voice growing. And I don't know what to do. I don't have access to his accounts, and he didn't leave me any money. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked. Daniel, I'm in trouble. There it was. The same woman who had mocked me for being too frugal, who had filed for divorce without a second thought, was now asking for my help. I could feel a mix of emotions bubbling up: anger, satisfaction, even pity. "What do you want me to do about it, Laura?" I asked, my tone calm but firm. I thought maybe you could help me, just until I figure things out," she said, desperation creeping into her words. "I know things didn't end well between us, but you're a good person, Daniel. You wouldn't just let me struggle, would you?" I let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "Struggle? Laura, you made it clear that I wasn't good enough for you, that I wasn't providing the life you wanted. Now you're asking me to step in after you left me for someone else?" "It's not like that," she protested quickly. I didn't know things would turn out this way. I made a mistake, okay? I should have appreciated what we had." A mistake. That word echoed in my mind. For years, I had tried to make her happy, to give her a life that was stable and secure. But none of it was enough. And now, she was realizing the value of what she'd thrown away. I took a deep breath, deciding it was time to give her the reality check she'd earned. "Laura, do you know why I never worried about spending money the way you wanted me to?" She hesitated. "Why?" "Because I didn't have to," I said, my voice steady. "I make $1.5 million a year, Laura. I just didn't feel the need to flaunt it. I thought what mattered was building something real, not showing off for the world." The line went silent. For a moment, I thought she might have hung up. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You what?" "You heard me," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I've always made more than enough to live the life you wanted. I just didn't see the point in wasting it on things that don't matter." Her breath hitched. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," I replied. "You never cared to ask. You were too busy comparing us to everyone else, chasing after some idea of what life should look like. And now you're paying the price for it." Her voice broke as she tried to respond. "Daniel, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. If I had known." "But you didn't," I interrupted, "because you didn't see me for who I was. You only saw what I could give you, or what you thought I couldn't give you." She was silent again, and I could imagine her sitting there, her face pale as the weight of my words sank in. "Look, Laura," I said, my tone softening slightly, "I'm not here to gloat or make you feel worse. But you made your choice. You wanted more, and now you have to live with the consequences." I don't know what to say," she whispered. "There's nothing to say," I replied. "Just take care of yourself, Laura. And next time, maybe think a little harder about what really matters." I hung up before she could respond. As I set the phone down, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, closure, and maybe even a bit of sadness for the life we could have had. But most of all, I felt free. I thought that would be the end of it. I had said my piece and made it clear where we stood. But Laura, as I should have known, wasn't one to give up so easily. The ripple effect of that phone call wasn't just about her panic. It was about the fallout that came next. It started with the messages. First, there were a few awkward texts. "Daniel, I've been thinking about what you said. Can we talk?" Then, a few more desperate ones. I didn't realize how much I threw away. "Please, just let me explain." She even tried calling again, but I let those go straight to voicemail. I had nothing left to say to her. The closure I needed had already happened. Then the rumors started trickling in. Mutual friends reached out, their voices filled with curiosity and disbelief. "Daniel, did you really make that much money all along?" One of them asked during a casual lunch. "Laura's been saying she didn't know, and now let's just say she's not handling it well." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "I didn't make a secret of who I was," I replied. "She just never cared enough to look beyond the surface." The truth was spreading, though not in the way Laura probably intended. People started to see her for what she really was: a woman who'd walked away from a stable, loving relationship for the illusion of something better. And when that illusion shattered, she tried to turn back. But life doesn't work that way. You can't unring a bell. I heard from a friend that her new husband, the one she had left me for, hadn't just disappeared. Apparently, he had been in debt, serious debt, and had used her as a way to stabilize his finances. Once he got what he wanted, he vanished, leaving her to deal with the aftermath. It was ironic, really. She'd left a man who was financially secure because she thought he wasn't flashy enough, only to end up with someone who was all flash and no substance. One evening, as I was sitting in my living room with a book and a glass of wine, I got another call. This time, it wasn't Laura. It was one of her friends. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity got the better of me. "Daniel, hi." The voice on the other end said, tentative but familiar. "It's Chloe." I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "No, it's fine," I replied, though I couldn't hide the slight edge in my tone. "What's going on?" "Well," she began, and I could almost hear her awkwardly shifting in her seat. "I've been talking to Laura. She's really struggling, Daniel. She's not herself. She feels awful about what happened and, honestly, she's falling apart." I stayed silent, letting her continue. "She knows she made a mistake," Chloe went on. "She knows she hurt you, but she doesn't know how to fix it. She thinks you hate her." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Chloe, I don't hate her," I said finally. "I just don't have anything left for her. She made her choices, and she has to live with them." "I get that," Chloe said quickly. "But would you consider giving her another chance? She's realized what she lost and—" "Stop," I interrupted, my voice firm but calm. "Chloe, listen to me. I'm not angry at Laura anymore, but I'm not going back. What we had wasn't real, not for her. I've moved on, and so should she." Chloe sighed, clearly disappointed, but she didn't argue. "I understand," she said softly. "I just thought I'd try." After the call, I sat there for a long time, staring at the darkened screen of my phone. It wasn't easy, shutting that door completely. A part of me, the part that had once loved Laura, wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to fix things. But I knew better. Some doors are meant to stay closed. The final nail in the coffin came when Laura tried to approach me in person. She showed up at a cafe where she knew I often worked. I saw her before she saw me, standing awkwardly near the entrance, scanning the room. Her once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe, or regret. When her eyes landed on me, she hesitated. For a moment, I thought she might turn around and leave. But then she took a deep breath and started walking toward me. "Daniel," she said softly, standing across the table from me. I looked up, my expression unreadable. "Laura." She fidgeted with her bag, her voice trembling slightly. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For the way I treated you. For not appreciating what we had." I nodded, letting her speak, but offering no response. "I made a mistake," she continued, her voice cracking. "I thought I wanted more, but I didn't realize I already had everything I needed." I set down my coffee and met her gaze. "Laura, I appreciate the apology. I really do. But it doesn't change anything. We're done. We've been done for a while now." Her face fell, but she nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I understand," she whispered before turning and walking away. As I watched her leave, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I knew I had made the right choice. The ripple effect of Laura's actions had finally reached its conclusion, and I was ready to move forward. By the time Laura's apology landed in front of me, I had already made up my mind. No amount of regret or acknowledgement from her could undo what had been done. Still, I knew one thing. This wasn't over for her. Not yet. And I needed to make sure she understood that the life she thought she was escaping to was never going to live up to what she'd left behind. After our brief conversation at the cafe, Laura's friends started reaching out more frequently. Some of them were trying to test the waters. Others seemed genuinely curious about why she was spiraling. The common thread? Laura wasn't handling the fallout of her choices well. I had become a sort of story among our mutual acquaintances. A man who'd quietly let his wife walk out, only to reveal that he had been far more than what she assumed. To be honest, it was exhausting. One evening, a friend of ours, Mike, called. He wasn't just a friend. He had also been one of the few people who remained neutral throughout our divorce. "Daniel," he started cautiously, "Laura's been talking to people. Let's just say she's trying to save face." Save face how? I asked, already bracing for the nonsense I knew was coming. She's telling people you intentionally hid your success from her too. I don't know. Keep her dependent? Make her look bad? Mike hesitated. It's a bit messy. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. So now I'm the villain for not throwing my money in her face? It's not just that, Mike said. She's also claiming you were distant, uninterested in building a life with her, that you pushed her into leaving. There it was. Laura was spinning her web again, trying to rewrite history in a way that made her the victim. I could have ignored it, let her words die out on their own. But something in me snapped. This wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring the truth stood tall in the face of her fabrications. Thanks for the heads up, I told Mike. Let's see how she handles some honesty. The first thing I did was gather every piece of evidence I had. The texts, emails, and receipts that painted a clear picture of what our relationship had actually been like. I wasn't planning to publicly shame her. This wasn't some grand expose. But I needed a way to make it clear to our mutual friends and acquaintances that I wasn't the person she was making me out to be. I started small, having conversations with those closest to us. When someone brought up Laura or hinted at her side of the story, I responded calmly. You know, it's funny, I'd say, because Laura knew exactly who I was when we got married. The only thing I ever hid from her was how much I earned, and that wasn't because I was ashamed. It was because I wanted someone who loved me for who I am, not what I have. Word spread quickly. It wasn't long before Laura's attempts to control the narrative started backfiring. People began asking her questions she couldn't answer. If Daniel was so distant, why did you rush to remarry someone else? Didn't he pay for everything? What exactly was missing in your life? She must have felt the walls closing in, because her calls to me became more frequent and more frantic. Daniel, can we please talk? She begged during one of those calls. I need to explain. You've explained enough, Laura, I said, my tone even. You made your choices and I've made mine. I'm done rehashing the past. But people are saying things, she argued, her voice trembling. They're making me out to be the bad guy. Maybe because you are, I said bluntly. You left me for someone you thought was better, Laura. You didn't even take the time to see the life we'd built. Now you want me to clean up your mess? I'm not your scapegoat. The final move in this little chess game came during an event neither of us could avoid, a mutual friend's birthday party. I wasn't planning to go, but Mike convinced me it was time to make a public appearance. You've been laying low, he said. It's time people see you thriving. Laura was there, of course, looking visibly uncomfortable when I walked in. I made my rounds, chatting with friends and catching up. Laura hovered near the bar, her gaze darting toward me every few minutes. Eventually, she approached, her expression a mix of nervousness and determination. Daniel, she said, her voice low. Can we talk privately? Sure, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. We stepped outside, and she wasted no time. I don't know what you're trying to prove by talking to everyone, but it's making things worse for me. I raised an eyebrow. I'm not trying to prove anything, Laura. I'm just telling the truth. If that bothers you, maybe you should take a closer look at why. Her composure cracked, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said. I thought I was doing what was best for me. And you did, I replied. You chose what you thought was best, and now you're living with the consequences. I'm not here to fix that for you. She stared at me, searching for any hint of the man who used to bend over backward to make her happy. But that man was gone. I had nothing left to give her, and it was time she understood that. Take care of yourself, Laura, I said finally, turning to leave. You're on your own now. After that final encounter with Laura, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. The weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I could focus solely on myself. No guilt, no second-guessing, and no regrets. The past was behind me, and I was ready to move forward. It didn't take long for an opportunity to present itself. My company, recognizing my contributions and leadership, offered me a position at their international headquarters. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to move abroad, advance my career, and start fresh in a new environment. Without hesitation, I accepted. The move was exhilarating. Stepping into a new country, immersing myself in a different culture, and building a life free from old associations felt like breathing in clean air after being stuck in a smoky room. I threw myself into my work, thriving in the high-energy environment of the headquarters. My team respected me, and my contributions were valued more than ever. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Of course, starting over wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of loneliness, especially during the first few months. I'd look around my new apartment, spacious, sleek, and far removed from the modest home I'd shared with Laura, and wonder if I'd ever find someone who truly saw me for who I was. But instead of dwelling on those thoughts, I reminded myself that healing takes time. I wasn't rushing into anything. This new chapter was about me. It was during one of my late-night work sessions at the office that I met Sophia. She was an executive from the marketing division, visiting from another branch for a collaborative project. At first, I noticed her because of her confident stride and the way she commanded attention in meetings. But what struck me most was her kindness, an unassuming, genuine warmth that set her apart. Our first conversation happened over coffee in the office lounge. She made a joke about how the vending machine's cappuccino tasted like regret, and I laughed harder than I had in months. From there, conversations flowed naturally. We started talking about everything: work, travel, our shared love of books, and even our past mistakes. One evening, as we worked late on a presentation, she looked at me with curiosity. "You're an interesting guy, Daniel," she said, leaning back in her chair. "You don't brag, but there's this quiet confidence about you. It's rare." I smiled, feeling a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. "I've learned that the loudest people in the room usually have the least to say," I replied. She laughed, nodding in agreement. "True, but sometimes the quiet ones have the most interesting stories." Over the weeks that followed, Sophia and I grew closer. She wasn't just someone to talk to. She was someone who truly listened. She appreciated the little things, like my love for cooking or my habit of staying behind after meetings to tidy up the conference room. And unlike Laura, she didn't measure success by material possessions or status symbols. To her, character mattered more than appearances. When I finally opened up about my past, she listened without judgment. I told her about Laura, the divorce, and the lessons I'd learned. I was chasing love, I admitted, but I wasn't paying attention to the kind of love I deserved. Sophia reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. "You deserve the kind of love that sees you," she said softly, and for the first time, I believed it. As our relationship deepened, I found myself growing in ways I hadn't expected. Sophia challenged me, inspired me, and reminded me of the joy that comes from sharing your life with someone who values you for who you are. She didn't just accept my quirks and habits, she embraced them. A year into our relationship, we moved in together. It wasn't a rushed decision, but a natural progression, one that felt right. Our home was filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and the kind of peace I'd forgotten existed. Eventually, we started talking about the future. Marriage, kids, building a life together. It all felt like a possibility, not a burden. Sophia's views on partnership were refreshing. She believed in equality, in sharing responsibilities, and in supporting each other's dreams. She didn't expect me to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. Instead, she wanted to carry it with me. When she told me she was pregnant, I felt a mix of emotions: joy, excitement, and a little fear. But more than anything, I felt ready. Ready to be a father, a partner, and a man who had learned from his mistakes. As I stood in our nursery one evening, painting the walls a soft shade of yellow, I thought about how far I'd come. My life with Laura felt like a distant memory, a lesson I'd learned and left behind. The man I was now, stronger, wiser, and more confident, wasn't defined by his past. He was defined by the choices he made after. As I stood in the nursery one evening, painting the walls for our soon-to-arrive child, I found myself reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had brought me to this moment. Life had a funny way of turning your deepest heartbreaks into your greatest lessons, and my time with Laura had been no exception. After Sophia fell asleep that night, I sat down with a cup of tea and let the memories flood back, not with bitterness but with clarity. My life with Laura felt like a distant dream, one that had taught me invaluable lessons about love, self-worth, and the kind of partner I wanted to be. One of the most profound realizations I had was this: sometimes, losing someone isn't a loss, it's a gift. Laura leaving me had been devastating at the time, but it forced me to confront truths I had been ignoring. It made me realize that I had been compromising too much of myself to meet someone else's expectations. And in doing so, I had overlooked my own needs and values. But the most surprising lesson? Closure doesn't come from revenge, vindication, or even an apology. It comes from understanding. I had spent so much time trying to understand why Laura had done what she did, but in the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was understanding myself, what I deserved, what I wanted, and what I refused to settle for ever again. I'd heard through the grapevine that Laura was still struggling. The mutual friends who had once eagerly entertained her stories were now avoiding her calls. Her new husband, or rather ex-husband, had left her with nothing but regrets and mounting debts. There was a time when hearing about her misfortune might have brought me some satisfaction, but now, it just felt sad. She wasn't a villain, not really. She was just someone who made poor choices and had to live with them. One afternoon, while Sophia and I were walking through a park, I saw Laura. She was sitting alone on a bench, her once carefully curated appearance now replaced with a simplicity that I didn't recognize. She looked up, and our eyes met. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. I considered walking over, saying something, anything, but then I looked at Sophia. She was laughing at something, completely unaware of the silent exchange happening a few feet away. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need to go back. Laura was a part of my story, but she wasn't my story. The man I was now didn't belong in that chapter anymore. As we walked away, I felt a strange sense of peace. Laura and I had both moved on, albeit in very different directions. She would have her lessons to learn, just as I had mine. And while I hoped she found happiness one day, I knew it wasn't my responsibility to ensure that. Now, as I sit in my office writing this, Sophia is calling me from the kitchen, her voice filled with excitement about the new crib we just assembled. Our baby will be here any day now, and life feels full in a way I never thought possible. If there's one thing I want anyone reading this to take away, it's this: never settle for less than you deserve. It's better to be alone than to be with someone who doesn't see your worth. And sometimes the hardest decisions, the ones that break your heart, are the ones that set you free. Laura once joked that I didn't know how to enjoy life. But as I look around at the life I've built, the woman I love, and the family I'm about to start, I realize that I've never been happier. True happiness isn't about wealth or appearances. It's about knowing who you are and sharing that with someone who truly values it. So here's to new beginnings, to lessons learned, and to the kind of love that doesn't just make you happy. It makes you whole.